a lot of our decision strategy is unconscious. There's a false sense of security when we're explaining that we think we really understand it. But if you have a series of companies that can study us so much, they can really predict our behavior very accurately, then obviously we've got a problem. The opportunities are huge. I think for the first time in human history is that the public can actually regain its power.
What are the hidden forces that are affecting our choices and our decision making? And can we do anything about those forces? And what can we do to take back control of the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis? To explore this and more, I'm delighted to be joined by David Charalambous, who's become a great friend over the years, a co-voyager in exploring what's been going on in the world, a guide on this journey in many ways through the upside down world, helping to not only navigate the information space, but also how to communicate with others and link it back to how we respond to the world around us and how we can once again take control. Now, David is an expert in communication and behavior. I often describe him as a polymath. He's a real expert in many different fields, but really centering on this idea about why do people do what they do and what can influence that and how can we influence ourselves to improve the quality of our lives ultimately. Now, David has been helping people like myself to better understand what has happened at an individual level and at a societal level since 2020 and offers some insight into some of the most burning questions that some of us may have, like why did so many people fall for the narratives? And why did some of the people that you would expect to understand things at a deeper level fall for such narratives? And these are important questions in this time as we embrace this kind of war on truth. So we're going to talk today about a number of different things, but I want to begin, David, by asking you a very big question that could actually shape the entirety of this interview or this discussion. And actually, my team and I have done a lot of preparation. We joke that we've got about 30 different questions we could do a quick fire round, but none of the conversations that we have are ever quick because we go into depth. But if you were to, in a nutshell, sum up from a behavioural point of view, what happened or what the heck happened to us during COVID, how would you respond to that?
I would say it's the discoveries of, if we call it behavioural science, which is a broad range of understanding how we work. And from what I can see, there was a major discovery a few decades ago widely, which various people have known for thousands of years, which is watch what people do, don't listen to what they say. Okay? Because for the most part, we will give reasons why we think we've done something, but it's a lot of the time it's our best guess. And what behavioural science has been able to do is to test these and see which ones are true and which ones are not. So then they've got an idea of what motivates people, what has people make certain decisions, and then they've been able to influence that.
Well, this has been kind of the best kept secret of the advertising industry for a long time, but
yeah,
it's quite clear now that this knowledge has
massively
seeped beyond the walls of advertising and business.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cialdini said when he wrote the book, he said the information in the advertising agencies is harder to get at than the bank vaults. You know, it's that valuable. I mean, for thousands of years, we've experienced propaganda, influence, all these things. But I think with technology and the big data, it's reached a point where they can effectively study to such a fine, minute detail what actually makes the difference. But also some very, very clever social science studies that have really provided results to what is it that makes someone do something. And obviously there's still a huge amount of mystery there, but there's really some sort of silly things almost that, for example, they would have someone watch a person being interviewed and then they would run control studies and they would have the person actually spill a coffee in one of the films. And it turned out that they bonded with the person spilling the coffee more if the person was very competent. Okay, so it almost made them more relatable.
Right.
But if you'd have asked the person, was it them spilling the coffee that made you like them more, they'd have said no. So what you have is so if you think about spilling the coffee as a variable, it's something that someone does. And then if like someone asks you, why do you like that person or why do you find that person attractive? A lot of the time you can't really verbalize. That makes sense what's going on. So effectively what's going on is that a lot of our decision strategy is unconscious. for efficient reasons. And there's a false sense of security when we're explaining that we think we really understand it. And obviously there's a lot of wise people that go, I have no, and a lot of quotes through the years is, we'll understand this. You can't always articulate it. That makes sense. But if you have a series of companies that can study us so much, then can really predict our behavior very accurately, then obviously we've got a problem. There's two things that go on. One, that's a problem because we're going to be controlled in a stealth way. But two, the opportunities for mankind to then understand itself and then, have better behavior, to the children to have more care and attention. It's this double-edged sword. And I really think the opportunities are huge. I think for the first time in human history is that the public can actually regain its power from, having to pay to live on this earth.
Do you believe that people fundamentally behave rationally?
Well, there's an interesting question because on the surface it would look like no, but someone like Roy Sutherland, who's a very clever man, would say that from a survival perspective, at second order logic and at the deeper levels, then it only becomes rational when you understand why someone's doing something. So, for instance, virtual signaling seems quite nonsense, but when you understand what the psyche's trying to achieve, then it makes sense. It's trying to survive. So I think there's a lot of wisdom to say, don't criticize something we don't understand. Yeah, and a lot of the time they talk about biases in a negative way, but humans achieve quite incredible things with the capacity that we have to process information. And we only can do that because we have biases and shortcuts and heuristics. Example, you're on holiday in Spain, you walk past two restaurants, one of them's packed, one of them's empty, which one do you go in? Okay, yeah, because you're taking a shortcut, right? And that's a sensible thing to do. A lot of times it's generally sensible to listen to experts if they're not corrupt and bought off and all these things. Like the wise person in the village, you should listen to over some random person. But the problem is that we've been gamed. And this is the thing, this gamification is understanding how something works and then game the system. So, for instance, of those two restaurants, if the guy owning the restaurant knows this and he invites all his cousins over, right, and then he puts a rat by the door on the other one so no one goes in there, he's literally manipulated reality that the empty restaurant might be better. But you're not going to know that. So that's the problem with this knowledge, is it can be then used to manipulate us. And that's what's happened the last 4 years. In that if you use the understanding of behavior to deliver the truth in a more effective way, then there's not really much wrong with that, in my opinion. But when you distort it to make it look like truth when it's not, then we have a major problem.
So, the reason I asked it, to react rationally is, every time I see a film or documentary about the last few years, it brings me right back to some of the stuff that I would describe as the madness. The social distancing, the mass masking.
Yeah.
And just some of the behaviours, people wearing, gloves, goggles, full face shields, and, hazmat suits. It was wild.
Yeah, absolutely. And Voltaire summed it up when he said, if you can convince me of absurdities, I can commit atrocities. So if you can convince someone that a mask is going to protect them from something that could kill them, then the rational thing to do would be to wear a mask. The nonsense is that the mask doesn't work. It probably affects, it seems to be a consensus of science there. The virus can get through. There's so many problems there. But it's all based on, and that's the thing about these things that we call sort of topical beliefs, okay? Because the humans acting quite rashly in some respects. It's just the information they've got is just absolute nonsense. There is a sensibleness to distance yourself from something that might hurt you, but we've got it back to front in so many things. And the question is that accidental or on purpose? So people avoid the sun, then they love all this crap on their skin and all these things. It's almost like, you see a post where they say, just ignore any recommendation from these big institutions and you probably won't go far wrong. And that seems to be a fairly general thing that holds up. When I look at health and I look at these things at a much deeper level, it's almost like so many of the things, the common beliefs about being healthy in the world are literally upside down. And this is the thing. And of course, the commercial aspects are very key to this.
Well, it's a driving force.
Massively so.
Now, To me, it feels like there's two groups of people. There's people who look back at the last few years and think that the world went mad and that they were behaving illogically.
Yeah.
But in a way, from what you're saying, that the other group of people think they acted perfectly logically. However,
based on the information
they had.
Yeah.
So what separates those two groups?
Prior experience, for the most part, because I mean, there's a lot more nuance to it. In the indoctrination, education, all these things play such a major role, because it's like literally who do you trust, and then really it's about how your belief systems are built up. For instance, near on a team, most of the people you'll talk to that do not trust the official party line, which is, is just a house of cards when you look at it, most of them will have had an experience in their life that fundamentally jarred their trust in certain things. And I had mine, and many, many people had them. There are a group of people that are just very good at critical thinking, that think that it just didn't add up, so it contradicted itself. But for the most part, it's people that have had an experience and they could see, it's almost like you can see the magic trick. Yeah, you now know what's happening and then you don't fall for it anymore. If you haven't had one of those, the longer it goes on, the more difficult it is to justify not knowing that something's wrong. But it is quite possible in today's world and the way that the algorithms work to only be exposed to a certain party line, and literally, and it's only when you really experience this. So I had a gentleman phone me up where he had lost his wife and he wanted to get the story out, and they'd both taken the vaccine. His wife had died, and it was a really tragic story. And he was saying to me, we thought we were doing the right thing, so if you haven't somehow found out that mainstream media is an advertising company, you know what I mean? Because we take for granted the experiences we've had, and we also don't realize that other people don't have access to the inside of our head when we're explaining things, because thousands of years ago we all had a fairly closely shared reality. Now two people can live in the same house and have a completely different worldview. And it's crazy from that respect. And now we're being so manipulated that our worldview can actually be governed. So like they can put algorithms, they can literally hide things from you. And there was actually a very interesting study a few years ago that Sarah Atkinson talks about. And it was some pharmaceutical company was literally provided information on a drug and then watched how the people researched that information, and then literally just went to all those places and manipulated it so that person couldn't literally see an objective view of this drug. You literally, and I saw Jimmy Dore joked about this. He said, like, during the pandemic, it was kind of crazy. People would sort of chastise you for saying, oh, actually, I'm going to look into that. And he said, like, imagine going, oh, I'm going to go to the car lot, but I'm going to have a little look. No, trust the salesman. Yeah. He's the expert. Yeah. It's so ludicrous. And people say statements like, oh, so you're telling me all the scientists in the world are colluding together? Well, no, because only a few of the people have seen the data, and they don't want to release it for 70 years. It's not a consensus. But when you look at what they did, they pretty much, from what I can see, is they've mapped out all the places that you would go to research a piece of information, plus all the things that you would need to see to convince you that something is one way. So you want illusion of consensus, you want the experts, you want blah, blah, blah. So, and then just created almost like an Ocean's 11 situation where you're the mark, being the member of the public, and you've got this reality that's sold to you, and there's all these actors playing their parts. So you literally believe what you're being told. But you take any one of those statements, it stops transmission. Any of that, they just weren't true, were they?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, here's the bizarre thing around this then. So I've seen entire websites or videos that are targeted at people who are following the narrative, saying in a very derogatory sense, here's how to communicate with people who don't trust the science.
Yes, I was just looking at one of those before this, and it's incredible because the simple fact of it matter is...
As they were sort of basket cases.
Yeah, the tools you use to communicate with someone are kind of, kind of universal. Mm. Yeah. And it's almost the way that you say something in a communication sense, not from a factual sense, is more important than what you say. And I'm of the belief now that if you have enough resources, you could literally get anyone to believe anything. And that's what they're pushing for. And they've also, it also creates a presupposition that they're correct and the other people are just crazy and you mustn't listen to the fact. If you had a group of so-called conspiracy theorists and they were 10 out of 10 for all the facts and the other guys were like 0 for 10,
Yeah.
like, why would you listen to the 0 for 10? Or how does the guy that's got everything wrong still pretend that they got everything right?
Well, because you've been told the 10 out of 10 people are crazy, far-right, anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theorists, and they've taken these words and attached meanings and labels to them.
Yeah, well, and they're very, very powerful terms, those are, because effectively, a lot of the time, people's beliefs are shaped by their desires. You don't want to be wrong. You don't, as a scientist, you don't want to have harmed people and all these things. So there's a lot of motivated reasoning that they would want to not admit their mistakes.
Also don't want to be kicked out of the herd.
Yeah, all these things. And there's obviously a massive ethical thing that they should probably own up and face their truth. But, the brain can really deceive us in certain ways. You've only got to watch two opposing teams play a sporting event and then see how they think the decisions are objective, and it's been shown time and time again, it isn't objective. You always think that your side's not getting as many decisions as it should do, etc. So it's really hard to be biased when identity comes into it.
Well, so this connects to me about my prior question about rationality, and you've got one group of people who, again, with my default, have acted irrationally, but they've rationalized it, and in their mind that's logical. And then you've got this other group that just think it was all crazy. How did that other group come to the conclusion what they were doing is rational? Are they actually operating consciously? In most cases, my observation is they haven't sat down consciously and go, is this the right thing to do?
Yeah, well, I don't think they're aware of the processes that they're getting their decision. I remember being in a place with a group of people and someone was asking me if I was going to take it. And I said, not if you paid me £1 million. And they said, oh, I'm taking it. I said, why? Because I believe in science. Now, as they're saying those words,
they saying I believe in Christianity or
there's so many layers to that. People don't realize that's literally probably programmed into them. Yeah. But it gives them it tick boxes all the things. It gives them a sense of superior, morale, all these things that they're doing the right thing, sensible part of the herd, all these things. It's quite easy to question. It's like, well, where are you following that science? And did you read any of the reports and all these things? But it's very easy then to get into a conflict.
Or they just say this, but they want this peer. Send me a peer review. It says this.
Yeah.
It's like, well, hang on. Some of this is emerging evidence. We don't have the peer review yet. And by the way, the industry doesn't want peer review studies on this.
Yeah.
And even if you do get a peer review, let's think about the term peer. Someone in your close network who probably is funded by the same people.
Yeah. Well, I heard peer review is where science goes to die, isn't it? But the crazy thing is they go, right, I want peer-reviewed studies, but literally they drove into a car park and got some stranger to inject some experimental thing into their arm. It's like, it's that same thing with, your team is always morally okay and the other team's the one making mistakes. And it's so easy to fall into this trap. The fascinating thing when it comes to, because you were touching on the decisions, and identity plays a major role in people's decisions. And the shortcut that a lot of people will take is, well, what does my team do? And I just do that. When you look at religions and any moral framework, do we choose to hold the beliefs, or do we, whatever, belief structure we have, do we just adopt the belief? So you could really it's quite an easier thought experiment. So when someone joins a cult or a gang, do they change their behaviour?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do they change their belief system to match the gang that they've joined?
Yes.
Yes. And that's very much what happens most of these times. It kind of, what I can see, it kind of works back to front. It's not that we join them because they share the same beliefs, and that can happen if someone's very conscious. But a lot of the time, we just almost adopt the belief system of our family, our community, whatever it is. Now, if you had a very good functional society, then that's a fairly sensible thing to do. Everyone's like, oh, well, these are the elders. They've worked out this is the right, the way to live in harmony. Oh, we'll copy that. That makes sense, but that's not how it works. We've got social engineers now working on, how do we get this person to believe this? How do we get them to buy more of this? Yeah, so it is problematic. When you look at the political studies, it's very fascinating because, you would, if you had said to someone, let's take Labour and Conservative in the UK, you say to a Labour supporter, we've got this new policy, would you support it or not? Okay. And then you tell them whether it's a Labour or Conservative policy, you would expect them to support it a little bit more if it was from their own party. But in fact, it's not a little bit more, it's 500% more.
Wow.
Which presupposes it's not really matter what the policy is, it's who proposes it. Same thing in the US. And of course, they've done things where they will bring up a Democratic policy, okay, and propose it to the Republicans. So it's clearly the opposite of what their belief system suggests. But if they tell the Republican members, oh, actually the higher people in the Republican Party really support this, they then support it, and vice versa with the Democrats. So it doesn't really matter which colour tie you have, which it seems to be the same processes in our mind running. Makes sense? So you'll spot these patterns. So for instance, if you talk to, a member of the public that believes a narrative and you say something that's uncomfortable for them, generally you'll get called a conspiracy theorist. But if you talk to people that have done a lot more critical thought, a similar thing, and you say something they don't like, they may call you controlled opposition. So you've got these, it's like human nature, right? And it's at this point where we as a species go, hang on a minute. Like, it's almost like standing back from what's going on and then seeing and realizing we are vulnerable. We're human. We make mistakes with all these things. And then I think that's when we start to get somewhere. We understand, hang on a minute. Because I remember when I was 17, I remember one of those, we was at a market, and it's one of those scams where they make you really want to buy something. So they're literally going, they're selling a few really incredible things for about £1 or £2 to their friends. Okay. And so there's this one, it become so good here. It's like, I remember buying this camera. Like before I knew it, I'd literally handed over loads of money for this thing I didn't even want. And I was like, whoa, what happened there? Like, it was such a startling thing that literally they had just managed to hack my unconscious mind and get me to basically buy something. I was quite fortunate because I said, well, I'm not leaving until you give me a refund. And they wanted to run the scam again. So they gave me the money back. But it's kind of stuck in my mind because it's like, under the right conditions, we are vulnerable. And that's effectively what they did. So I know one of the things that we've talked about before is that situation versus the person. Okay, now it's a very important sort of conundrum, as it were, in psychology, and it's a bit like nature-nurture debate, but it's effectively what would affect people's behaviour more, their personality or the situation? And it's not like it's a clear black and white, it's this sort of interchange of things that happen, but the majority of people, about 90% of people, are more affected by the situation than they can resist. So only about 10% of people can really resist most situations. That makes sense? So effectively, you create the right conditions, you can almost predict most people's behaviour. Yeah. So if you come up with some toilet roll shortage, you can predict that a number of people are going to go and buy all the remaining toilet rolls.
I remember you and I were speaking at a conference, and a chair was left in the irrational place on the stage, and you said, watch this, the next person to come out and sit on that chair, because it had been set, the stage was set for it, and they walked up and they did it. The scenario created the action.
Yeah, and that happens so often. But you see, what's interesting, most of it, we don't even think about it. We adapt so quickly to our, it's quite incredible. And it's
scary.
It's incredible. It's only scary because we got immoral people, and basically we've got a small group of, I call them the parasite class, that basically have this sort of, they somehow think they're royalty and they can govern mankind, but they can do so much damage. That's the thing. Like, and I joke, it only takes one turd in the swimming pool to ruin the party. It's like literally, it doesn't take much to create a real problem. And of course, you look at like musical chairs, for instance, right? If you start taking chairs faster away than people, like there's a real problem. And that's the monetary system. Like it's, people don't realise. For instance, I remember Alan Watts saying back in the 70s, he said, if you said to someone, oh, we can't work today, there's no more inches, you go like, what are you talking about? But money is kind of similar to inches because it's a concept. It doesn't really exist. The bank's printing, it's not attached to anything. So when they get all this stuff is crazy. It's man-made and yet, it's you got to do a little bit more understanding of the monetary system to see why it's so crazy. But it literally is that. It's they say, oh, we can't pay you because, we're out of money, all that stuff. But literally they print out of thin air. There's no lack of money resource in the world. It's just being sucked into one or two people's pockets. The cost of living crisis. Can you really have a cost of living crisis if Tesco's are making 5x their profit, British Gas are making... a crisis is a crisis.
You can have an inequality crisis.
Everyone suffers in a crisis, but this isn't. It's like man-made.
Yeah. So where does this leave... It sounds to me we're at a risky place, particularly in a digital environment where, we're no longer reliant on, the individual publications in a local community. We're now in a digital world. It's global.
Yeah.
And just like the mainstream media, there's a handful of companies that own and operate the media channels, the social media channels, the tech platforms. In fact, the tech platforms, the Apples, the Androids, they can, if they want, they can switch off your access to a particular app. An app can switch off your particular access to particular information.
Yeah.
How do we reclaim our ability to discern and make our own decisions?
See, because there's really often a couple of ways of looking at the same event. And I always tell a story of the two shoe salesmen that go to India, okay? And the CEO says, oh, when you guys come into my office, I want to talk to you one at a time. So the first guy comes in, he says, what's it like? He said, oh, it's terrible. No one wears any shoes. Okay, he says, oh. And then the second guy comes in, he said, what's it like? He says, oh, it's fantastic. No one wears any shoes. Right, we've got the whole market. Yeah. So there's always these, and obviously we are, under the cosh, we're getting things stolen from it's literally horrendous what's happened to so many people at the moment. There's lots of people that deserve apologies, there's people that have been injured, all these things. But basically what tends to happen is that people won't change a lot of the time unless there's a lot of pain forced. So when I worked in the health industry, people really only start caring about their health when they get sick. There's not a lot of real preventative stuff going on. And then, I think we reach an opportunity, because one thing that happens is when you stop trusting everything that you're seeing, and before seeing was believing, but now you can literally watch a video and not know whether it's AI and faked or whatever. Yeah. That kind of forces us to think. Yeah. It forces us to be critical about what's going on, because we shouldn't really just take face value on something that we're hearing anyway. It shouldn't just be that becomes fact, truth, and we move on. So we should be able to build up a body of knowledge, and then things that don't make sense should really stand out like a sore thumb. So I think in that respect, it might help with the decentralization of everything, which in my view, and I think we spoke about this, has to happen, because the centralization of power is, in my opinion, the most biggest danger to freedom there is.
Yeah, I'm keeping a very watchful eye on the emergence of digital technologies, digital platforms, decentralized digital platforms.
Yeah.
And the world of decentralization is a natural. It was already in motion because of some of the underlying currents, but now it's accelerating, and that's where I take a lot of hope in what we're seeing now. That this is a catalyst for decentralization. Yeah. That said, the first wave of digital social platforms was also a form of decentralization, liberating information, but that very quickly, in the scheme of time, became centralized again, and that pattern may or may not play out.
Yeah, because people are trying to, control things a lot of the time, and logic is one of the biggest problems we have, and that sounds a bit strange on the surface, but logic works very well when you're building a building or you're building a bridge, or there's anything where you've got all the variables, they're known, and they don't fight back. They don't change their decisions, whatever. You've got, moving parts maybe, but they're predictable. But when you've got organisms and humans and things like this, then you got to expect that it's not going to work. You got to have a systems theory. So there's some real classic examples of this. So in Mexico City, they had a problem with pollution. So their solution was to, okay, let's make the number plates from 1 to 5 be able to drive on these days and 5 to 9 on those days. So that should mean we halve pollution. So that's the typical logical plan that an economist or any other of these people that don't think outside the box or with more variables would come to. But in fact, what happened? Pollution went up significantly, because all that happened was that the people bought a second car for the second one, and that second car was much older, much more pollution. Yeah. So then people had 2 cars, and then they would be driving a lot more. And you see this repeated time and time again. They did it with the adders, I think it was in India, where they said, cobras in India, they said, right, we've got a cobra problem, so if you provide, find a cobra and you give it to the government, you get $100, so then people start breeding cobras. They have the thing, I think it was in Hanoi, when they had a rat problem and they said, oh, you bring in a rat's tail, we give you a certain amount of money. So then people would cut off the tails, leave the rat to run off, take in the rat, and then of course they start breeding rats. So there's literally this time and time again that people don't realize that people will game the system. Now, good people don't need laws, and bad people will find a way around them. Okay, I think that was Plato, and it's really that we've got to build systems that do not put people under pressure where they need to cheat. Okay, because 65% of people can have their moral compass moved under the right conditions, but the point is not to create those conditions. Okay, I mean, I joke about a lot of the time I've gone to many countries, South America and other places, and the taxi driver will not take me directly to the place. They will drive around and around and around. You know, in Athens, I think tourists have something like a 10 or 15% extra journey than the locals. Now, if the taxi driver had a very comfortable standard of living, would he do that? No. So basically, you've got one of the big pressures within the system is the finance system. And it seems to be everywhere. Yeah. And if we didn't, but it's like currency is man created. It's a concept that we created. And the fact that we let private banks print money, I mean, that notion, I mean, when I spoke to finance people about this, they think it's okay. But if you can print money and money can buy anything, then whoever prints money buys anything. Yeah. Like, it's so crazy that concept. So
the problem with those parts, David, and I'm grappling with these ideas as well, the system and the interrelation, the relationship between the system and ourselves, the human condition. Is the human condition creating the system, or is the system creating the human condition? There's a symbiotic relationship. But it's good to know that there are people working on these different ideas for systems, and some of that stuff we're looking at the People's Reset. But the People's Reset event, we're really focusing on the individual path.
Yeah.
So we know we need to see some of this systemic change. And I think the good thing is, to me, a community or society is the sum of its parts, and its parts are individuals.
Yeah.
So they're inextricably linked. So on that basis, what can individuals do to be part of the change in your view?
Yeah, well, that's the key thing, because, what we've been doing today is really to realize that your belief system is not necessarily your choice. Yeah, you may have just learned things that are not useful for you. To really, take our power back is we've got to understand how we function, what things in our mind are not serving us to change. Because there's an interesting thing, when you think about system and the individual, and it's like, because the situation has such a major effect on an individual's behavior, then it's almost like the individuals have got to design their system very well. Yeah, and I think for the most part, and I'd say 99% of people want a fair deal, okay, and they're happy for fairness, okay. And what does happen is that the education system tends to drum that out of people to a point. They start to think that a lack of fairness is okay, and companies can make all these obscene monies. But I think it's really, attend to the garden of our mind. Make sure that, we want to be healing the traumas. We want to be emotionally sound, thinking correctly. Because the school systems don't really give you the tools you need to function well. So it's almost like we need to self-educate. And I think that's going to start happening. I have heard rumours, many, many different people, including myself, are thinking about running courses on, because it sounds patronising in some ways, run a course on how to think, but it's actually a lot harder than you think.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Understanding of what thinking is.
Yeah. Because
epistemology is.
Exactly. I've had to think, right, am I looking at this the right way? And really just start to put my own thinking under a microscope. And it, once you sort it and get it functional, then it tends to work really well. But yeah, that's the kind of things we need to do. But we need to understand that our behavior is not driven in a vortex. Our behavior is driven by identities and belief systems. And until those are functioning really well, our behavior is not going to function well. Yeah. So if I'm a needy person and I start dating someone, then that behavior is going to really cause a problem in the relationship. So until I deal with that neediness, it's going to be very hard. And then I'm going to say, I can't find the right person, when it's more that I can't be the right person. Right. And so really, it comes back to that somewhat cheesy saying, which is change comes from within. it's so true. It's, because behavior is what you see visibly, you see environments and behavior and these things interacting, but all of that is driven from the inside of our mind. Yeah. And until that's aligned, okay, then the behavior is going to look quite bizarre at times.
Absolutely. David, it's been a wonder as always to talk to you, and I concur completely with that conclusion. We had the privilege today actually doing some work with you on a workshop, a live workshop, which you'll be able to watch. We've recorded it. You'll be able to see the whole thing where we've actually gone through some of these techniques, and David and I haven't talked about it yet, but I'd love to extend, I think, with David's support, the reach of this potential, the tools that he's sharing to actually impact the quality of individuals' lives. So watch this space on that. We'll give David the chance to decide if he wants to do something like that. But I think what he's been sharing today and what we've worked on together, and we'll link it up in the description, is a powerful set of tools that can really change the game for us. And I think we're at an age in history when this type of information can be as viral as the stuff that has far less meaning in our lives. We can actually disseminate ideas that are deeply meaningful and processes and tools that can enable us to have this greater sovereignty over our minds and our lives and our own fulfillment and potential. So, David, thank you so much again for being here with us today.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
To close out, just could you share where people can find you online?
Sure. Just to touch on those tools and techniques, there's just some incredible tools and techniques that are various places in the world that we've looked to find that are very useful. So there, and lots of them are tried and tested 50, 60 years. So we'll share some of those. If you want to more find out about the project, it's reachingpeople.net. From there, you can access the YouTube channel and the Rumble channel. And pretty much we try to navigate the censorship. So if something's a bit tricky, we stick it on Rumble. As many viewers probably recognize.
Thank you, David. Thanks again, as always. Please do share this episode. It's important that more people understand what's been happening over the last 4 years, not only the practicalities of what's been happening and whether they make sense, but actually the psychology behind it and why people, did certain things, why others didn't. And hopefully this conversation has given you some ideas about why that has been. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do hit the share button, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon on the podcast.
Thank you.